January 6, 1945. The sun had barely risen over the waters east of Okinawa, painting the Pacific in pale shades of silver and gray. A low hum of engines filled the air, punctuated by the sharper, more urgent cries from anti-aircraft batteries aboard the USS Lexington. Somewhere above, the faint silhouette of a lone Japanese A-6M-0 cut across the sky, diving with deadly intent. Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Callahan gripped the controls of his F-6F Hellcat, feeling the subtle vibrations of the engine through his palms. His squadron had been patrolling for hours, eyes scanning the horizon for the kamikaze pilots who had become a terrifying staple of this campaign. The radio crackled with warnings, enemy planes approaching from the south. In a split second, a screaming kamikaze appeared, wings glinting in the dawn. Time slowed. Jimmy's heart hammered as he twisted the Hellcat, dodging the plane's initial strike. Explosions erupted around him, smoke trailing across the carrier deck, and he realized this was not just a fight for survival, it was a test of skill, courage, and instinct against one of the deadliest weapons the Japanese had unleashed. Every second from here would decide life or death. By early 1945, the Pacific War had reached a brutal crescendo. The Imperial Empire, once an unstoppable force sweeping across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific, was now on the defensive. Allied forces had steadily chipped away at their strongholds, island by island, turning the ocean into a deadly chessboard. Okinawa, a critical stepping stone to Japan itself, had become the focal point of the conflict. Its capture would allow the Allies to stage operations against the Japanese mainland, and the Imperial forces were determined to resist at all costs. The U.S. Navy, by contrast, had grown into a vast, meticulously organized machine. Aircraft carriers dominated the fleet, their decks bristling with fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes. Radar and intelligence networks allowed the Americans to anticipate attacks before they struck, a technological advantage the Japanese could rarely match. Logistics had become a core strength. Supply chains spanning thousands of miles ensured that fuel, ammunition, and replacement aircraft reached the front lines faster than the enemy could destroy them. Every plane in the sky and every shell fired from a ship was part of a calculated, overwhelming strategy. Japanese forces, recognizing their disadvantages, turned to desperate measures. The kamikaze, or divine wind, became their signature tactic. Pilots, often young and minimally trained, volunteered to crash their aircraft directly into U.S. ships. The psychological impact of these attacks was profound. Sailors watched in horror as planes dove from the sky like guided missiles. Yet the strategy was born of necessity. Conventional air assaults were failing, and Japan's industrial capacity could no longer match the relentless output of American shipyards. Each kamikaze strike was a gamble, a single moment where courage, desperation, and timing could inflict significant damage. For American pilots like Lieutenant James Callahan, the kamikaze threat demanded constant vigilance and precision. Training had emphasized aerial awareness, rapid decision-making, and mastery of the Hellcat, a fighter specifically designed to counter Japanese aircraft. The F-6F Hellcat had become the backbone of the Navy's air superiority strategy. With its powerful engine, armored cockpit, and heavy armament, it could absorb damage while delivering lethal firepower. Combined with radar-assisted carrier operations, this technological edge allowed U.S. pilots to survive and counter attacks that would have been fatal in earlier stages of the war. The men who flew these planes were not just soldiers, they were symbols of American ingenuity, courage, and industrial might. Each sortie carried not only the mission's objectives, but the weight of strategic necessity. The Pacific Theater had become a crucible, testing pilots physically, mentally, and emotionally. The vast ocean, the endless horizon, and the constant threat of kamikaze attacks created an environment of tension and anticipation. Every dawn could bring survival or death. Amid this tension, the carriers themselves were marvels of coordination and discipline. Deck crews worked like clockwork, launching fighters in precise sequences, while simultaneously repairing, refueling, and rearming planes that had returned from combat. Communication between ships, aircraft, and command centers ensured that every move had purpose, every response was calculated, and every pilot was positioned for maximum effectiveness.
For the Japanese, facing such an organized and technologically advanced force was increasingly disorienting. They were forced into reactive maneuvers, desperate improvisation, and reliance on tactics that could inflict momentary damage but rarely altered the strategic trajectory. As dawn broke on January 6, 1945, the stage was set. The U.S. fleet lay ready in the waters east of Okinawa, a sprawling collection of carriers, battleships, and support vessels. The Japanese, knowing the stakes, prepared to unleash kamikaze attacks in waves, hoping to disrupt operations and inflict psychological shock. Lieutenant Callahan and his fellow pilots would soon find themselves at the epicenter of this confrontation. What followed would test not only their skill, but the very limits of human endurance in the face of war.
In these waters, the clash of strategy, technology, and human courage would determine the survival of men and machines alike. Every maneuver, every shot fired, and every decision made in the next moment would ripple through the Pacific, shaping the outcome of battles that historians would study for decades. The air was calm, almost serene, a deceptive quiet before the storm that would define this day. And in that stillness, James Callahan's instincts braced for the inevitable confrontation. The men who would face the kamikaze threat were products of rigorous and unforgiving training. Lieutenant James Callahan had spent months mastering every nuance of the F-6FH Hellcat, the Navy's premier fighter. From precision maneuvers to gunnery drills, pilots were pushed to react instinctively under pressure. Survival depended on muscle memory, split-second judgment, and the ability to remain calm while death approached at hundreds of miles per hour. Carrier operations added another layer of complexity. Takeoffs and landings demanded exact timing, coordination with deck crews, and flawless execution. A single miscalculation could end a pilot's life even without enemy interference. The Hellcat itself was a triumph of engineering, equipped with a Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine producing 2,000 horsepower. It could reach speeds exceeding 380 miles per hour, outmatching most Japanese aircraft. 650 caliber Browning machine guns provided devastating firepower, and its rugged design allowed it to absorb damage that would have downed lesser planes. Armor plating protected the pilot, while self-sealing fuel tanks minimized the risk of fire from small arms fire. In skilled hands, the Hellcat was not just a plane, it was a lethal instrument capable of turning a defensive position into a decisive counterattack. U.S. carrier task forces functioned as floating fortresses. Radar installations detected enemy aircraft long before visual contact, giving pilots precious seconds to intercept threats. Anti-aircraft batteries were strategically positioned to create overlapping fields of fire, and coordinated fleet maneuvers ensured that carriers remained protected while launching strike aircraft. Communication lines between ship and sky were constant and precise. This integration of technology, logistics, and human skill gave the Americans a formidable advantage, but it also demanded vigilance. Any lapse in attention could allow even a single kamikaze to penetrate defenses, causing catastrophic damage. The Japanese approach was starkly different. Kamikaze pilots often received only minimal training in flight and combat tactics. Their mission was singular: strike a U.S. vessel at any cost. While lacking in conventional skill or endurance, their attacks carried an intensity born of desperation and ideology. Pilots were briefed on weak points in carrier formations and encouraged to exploit gaps, but execution in these waters, the clash of strategy, technology, and human courage would determine the survival of men and machines alike. Every maneuver, every shot fired, and every decision made in the next moment would ripple through the Pacific, shaping the outcome of battles that historians would study for decades. The air was calm, almost serene, a deceptive quiet before the storm that would define this day. And in that stillness, James Callahan's instincts braced for the inevitable confrontation. The men who would face the kamikaze threat were products of rigorous and unforgiving training. Lieutenant James Callahan had spent months mastering every nuance of the F-6FH Hellcat, the Navy's premier fighter. From precision maneuvers to gunnery drills, pilots were pushed to react instinctively under pressure. Survival depended on muscle memory, split-second judgment, and the ability to remain calm while death approached at hundreds of miles per hour. Carrier operations added another layer of complexity. Takeoffs and landings demanded exact timing, coordination with deck crews, and flawless execution. A single miscalculation could end a pilot's life even without enemy interference. The Hellcat itself was a triumph of engineering. Equipped with a Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine producing 2,000 horsepower, it could reach speeds exceeding 380 miles per hour, outmatching most Japanese aircraft. 650 caliber Browning machine guns provided devastating firepower, and its rugged design allowed it to absorb damage that would have downed lesser planes. Armor plating protected the pilot, while self-sealing fuel tanks minimized the risk of fire from small arms fire. In skilled hands, the Hellcat was not just a plane, it was a lethal instrument capable of turning a defensive position into a decisive counterattack. U.S. carrier task forces functioned as floating fortresses. Radar installations detected enemy aircraft long before visual contact, giving pilots precious seconds to intercept threats. Anti-aircraft batteries were strategically positioned to create overlapping fields of fire, and coordinated fleet maneuvers ensured that carriers remained protected while launching strike aircraft. Communication lines between ship and sky were constant and precise. This integration of technology, logistics, and human skill gave the Americans a formidable advantage, but it also demanded vigilance. Any lapse in attention could allow even a single kamikaze to penetrate defenses, causing catastrophic damage. The Japanese approach was starkly different. Kamikaze pilots often received only minimal training in flight and combat tactics. Their mission was singular: strike a U.S. vessel at any cost. While lacking in conventional skill or endurance, their attacks carried an intensity born of desperation and ideology. Pilots were briefed on weak points in carrier formations and encouraged to exploit gaps, but execution depended entirely on courage under extreme pressure. For those on the receiving end, the psychological strain was immense. The sudden appearance of a screaming aircraft, intent on collision, left little room for hesitation. Intelligence reports from the months preceding the Okinawa campaign warned U.S. commanders of the increasing kamikaze threat. Planners knew that the Japanese were concentrating resources on special attack units, often disguising aircraft movements and attacking in coordinated waves. Training exercises simulated these attacks, but the unpredictable nature of human pilots meant no two encounters were identical. Each sortie carried risk, each engagement demanded focus, and each encounter tested both the machine and the man. On the carrier deck, the tension was palpable. Pilots checked their instruments, reviewed mission objectives, and mentally rehearsed evasive maneuvers. Crew members performed last-minute maintenance, ensuring that every component, from landing gear to weapons systems, was functioning perfectly. The Pacific's vastness provided both opportunity and danger. Enemy aircraft could appear from any horizon, and the ocean below offered no sanctuary if a pilot went down. Coordination between air, sea, and intelligence elements was not optional. It was the difference between life and death. For Lieutenant Callahan, all these preparations culminated in this single day. He understood the mechanics of his aircraft, the strategies of his commanders, and the desperation driving his enemy. Yet even with training and technology, nothing could fully prepare him for the shock of a kamikaze diving from the sky. The calculus of survival would demand instinct, precision, and courage in a way that textbooks and simulations could not replicate. As dawn deepened into morning, the calm horizon masked the chaos that would erupt.
Radar screens flickered with incoming contacts. Deck crews braced for action. Pilots' hearts raced with anticipation. And somewhere in that mix, Lieutenant Callahan adjusted his straps, gripped the controls, and prepared to confront the deadly convergence of skill, technology, and human resolve that would define his day. The next moments would bridge preparation and action, leading directly to a confrontation that would test the very limits of human endurance. Lieutenant James Callahan's experience that morning was defined by a singular, unrelenting focus. Every movement of his F-6FH Hellcat was an extension of his own reflexes, honed through months of training. As the first Kamikaze appeared on the radar, a rush of adrenaline surged through him, sharpening his senses. His eyes tracked the plane's trajectory, calculating speed, angle, and potential impact. Heartbeats synchronized with the vibrations of the engine. The cockpit became a tunnel of concentration where nothing existed outside the imminent threat. Fear was present but controlled, a tool rather than an obstacle. Callahan's survival depended on instinct, split-second judgment, and the confidence in his aircraft's capabilities. As he twisted and banked, narrowly avoiding the Kamikaze's deadly path, he relied on memory, muscle, and training over conscious thought. Each evasive maneuver was precise yet fluid, an intricate dance with life and death. For the pilot, heroism was inseparable from skill. It was not a desire for glory, but the raw imperative to survive, to protect his shipmates, and to complete the mission.
The U.S. Carrier Task Force functioned as a complex organism designed to maximize both offensive and defensive potential. Aircraft were launched in coordinated waves, patrolling sectors determined by radar and intelligence. Deck crews executed intricate choreography, ensuring planes were armed, fueled, and ready for immediate launch or recovery. Anti-aircraft batteries were calibrated for overlapping fields of fire, creating a defensive envelope that left little room for error for incoming enemy aircraft. Kamikaze tactics tested these defenses to their limits. Attacks were often timed to exploit gaps in radar coverage or moments when planes were landing and the deck was most vulnerable. U.S. commanders responded with dynamic strategies, positioning picket ships at key distances, maintaining continuous combat air patrols, and implementing flexible defensive formations. Every decision had a cost-benefit calculation. An early interception might prevent damage but leave other sectors exposed. The Pacific ship environment was a high-stakes balance between offensive readiness and defensive security, with pilots like Callahan at the fulcrum. The technological edge of the U.S. Navy was decisive. The F-6F Hellcat was more than a fighter. It was a response to a specific challenge posed by Japanese aircraft and kamikaze attacks. Its speed, firepower, and resilience allowed pilots to engage multiple targets while evading imminent threats. Armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks increased survival odds even in the face of close calls. Radar provided another layer of advantage. Early warning allowed the task force to vector fighters toward threats before visual contact. Data from radar operators was transmitted to combat air patrols in real time, a coordinated effort that turned vast stretches of ocean into a monitored battlefield. Japanese pilots, in contrast, relied on visual spotting, navigation by instinct, and luck. This technological asymmetry forced the enemy into reactive, often desperate maneuvers. The combination of advanced aircraft and integrated radar gave pilots like Callahan the tools to survive and dominate even under extreme pressure. From the Japanese perspective, the Pacific skies had become a proving ground of desperation. Young pilots, often barely trained beyond basic flight, were thrust into the deadly calculus of kamikaze missions. For many, this was a mission without return, a cultural and military expectation that demanded ultimate sacrifice. As Lieutenant Callahan's Hellcat appeared in their path, the enemy pilots faced not only a skilled opponent, but also the technological superiority of American aircraft and radar. The psychological strain was immense. Observing a single U.S. pilot maneuver with precision, dodging attacks and returning fire, these young men were often stunned, horrified, or disoriented.
Their missions relied on shock and surprise. When met with calculated evasion and counterattack, the effects were devastating to morale. Every failed strike reinforced the futility of their tactics and the overwhelming advantage of the Americans. The enemy could only react, never seize initiative, as U.S. pilots dictated the terms of engagement. On the carrier deck and in the fleet's command centers, decisions were made with split-second urgency. Admiral Mitcher's doctrine emphasized aggressive air patrols, layered defense, and constant readiness. Each incoming radar blip demanded evaluation. Was it a reconnaissance plane, a fighter squadron, or a kamikaze dive? Orders were transmitted with clarity and speed, ensuring that pilots like Callahan had the support they needed, while still operating with autonomy in the air. Leadership extended beyond strategy. It was also morale management. Crew rotations, rest periods, and mission planning were designed to prevent fatigue from undermining performance. For the pilots, the presence of experienced commanders observing and coordinating operations provided confidence and accountability. Effective leadership turned individual heroism into collective strength, ensuring that even extraordinary feats like surviving a kamikaze attack contributed to the broader success of the task force. The human element of this confrontation cannot be understated. Every sortie carried ethical and emotional weight. Pilots risked life and limb, knowing that a single misstep could destroy not only themselves, but also comrades aboard the carrier. Survival was both a personal victory and a moral responsibility. Every aircraft saved from destruction meant additional protection for the fleet and the lives of sailors below. For Japanese pilots, moral duty manifested differently, intertwined with cultural imperatives of honor and sacrifice. Their missions, while deadly and desperate, were acts of devotion to a nation in crisis. The collision of these perspectives, American skill and technology against Japanese resolve and sacrifice, defined the Pacific air battles in a way that was both tactical and profoundly human. Each engagement was not just a calculation of aircraft and weapons, but a test of courage, endurance, and decision-making under extreme conditions. Beyond individual heroism, the American naval machine depended on meticulous logistics. Ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and aircraft replacements were constantly in motion. Supply ships and tenders operated alongside the combat vessels, ensuring uninterrupted readiness. Repair crews worked around the clock, often under threat of enemy attack, to return damaged planes to the air as quickly as possible. This logistical depth allowed the U.S. fleet to absorb shocks like kamikaze strikes without collapsing. Even when a ship sustained damage, contingency plans ensured that carriers could continue launching planes and supporting operations. For the Japanese, this resilience was demoralizing. Attacks that might have crippled smaller or less prepared forces had only temporary effects. The Americans' ability to sustain high-tempo operations created an environment where skill, courage, and technology could consistently overcome isolated threats. In this convergence of human, tactical, technological, enemy, moral, and logistical factors, the battle above Okinawa was both predictable and unpredictable. Every angle reinforced the overarching theme. American pilots operated from a position of preparedness, skill, and ingenuity, while Japanese forces were increasingly reactive, desperate, and constrained. The stage was set. All the training, preparation, technology, and strategy converged on a single moment in the sky, where Lieutenant Callahan would face the kamikaze threat head-on. The confrontation would define the day, the squadron, and the limits of human courage under fire. By mid-morning on January 6, 1945, the calm horizon had vanished, replaced by the roar of engines and the deafening crack of anti-aircraft fire. Lieutenant James Callahan, perched in his F-6F Hellcat, scanned the sky with practiced precision. The radar had picked up multiple contacts, Japanese aircraft converging in coordinated waves, their intent unmistakable. Among them, the most imminent threat was the Kamikaze, a plane aimed directly at the USS Lexington.
The first attack came without warning. A Mitsubishi A6M0, engines screaming, dove from the clouds, wings glinting in the sun. Callahan's heart raced, yet his training took over. With a violent twist of the yoke, he rolled the Hellcat into a sharp bank, narrowly avoiding the plane's nose, which passed mere feet below his wing. The sound of shattering metal and the sudden eruption of flames from the carrier below reminded him that hesitation was fatal. Callahan immediately engaged his own weapons. 6.50 caliber machine guns rattled as he strafed a second incoming Zero, the tracer rounds cutting through morning haze. One pilot spun out of control, smoke trailing from his damaged plane as it plummeted into the ocean. The first kill was a combination of skill, timing, and the aircraft's superior firepower. Yet the Kamikaze threat was relentless. Another wave approached, this time targeting the smaller escort carriers and destroyers forming the fleet's perimeter. Callahan's squadron scrambled to intercept. Coordination was critical. Pilots maintained formation while scanning the skies for threats, their every maneuver a balance between offense and survival. Explosions from anti-aircraft fire illuminated the sky like sudden flashes of lightning, smoke rising from the water as damaged planes crashed. Amid this chaos, Callahan spotted the main Kamikaze descending again, this time directly toward the Lexington's flight deck. With split-second judgment, he angled his Hellcat between the enemy and the carrier, drawing fire away from the ship. The Zero's approach was precise, its pilot committed to impact. Callahan rolled the aircraft, firing continuous bursts, hitting critical sections of the plane's wings. Flames erupted along the fuselage, yet it continued its dive, glinting metal streaking toward the deck. At the last moment, the Kamikaze veered slightly, likely due to structural failure from Callahan's attack, and slammed into the water just short of the ship. The fleet let out a collective sigh of relief, but there was no time to pause. Radar blips indicated additional contacts. Enemy fighters had begun to flank the task force. Callahan pivoted, switching targets, each movement calculated to maximize effectiveness while minimizing exposure. The Japanese pilots, shocked and disoriented by the unexpected resistance, struggled to coordinate their attacks. Some attempted head-on dives, only to be met with overlapping fire from Callahan's squadron and the fleet's anti-aircraft batteries. Others tried to circle and evade, but radar-directed interceptions cut off escape routes. Each engagement tested the limits of human reflexes, aircraft capabilities, and tactical coordination. For Callahan, the battle was a blur of smoke, fire, and motion. One after another, enemy fighters approached, 2, 3, 4, each one representing both a deadly threat and an opportunity for counterattack. His fingers flew over the triggers, eyes tracking multiple vectors simultaneously, instincts guiding split-second maneuvers. By mid-morning, he had already downed 2 Japanese aircraft, a combination of evasive skill, superior training, and the Hellcat's durability. From the fleet below, the psychological impact was evident. Sailors watched a lone pilot engage multiple enemies with precision, dodging death while protecting the carriers. The Japanese pilots, meanwhile, were stunned, their surprise and disbelief compounded by the fact that a single fighter was holding off what should have been overwhelming numbers. The tactical balance had shifted. American skill and preparation dominated, forcing the enemy into reactive, desperate measures. Callahan's focus never wavered. Each maneuver was both defensive and offensive, designed to protect the fleet while eliminating threats. Anti-aircraft fire provided cover, but ultimate responsibility rested with the pilot in the sky. Every second demanded perfect judgment, and any error would be fatal. In this crucible of speed, fire, and human endurance, the day's defining moments were unfolding. The first stage of the battle had been survived, but the threat was far from over. The Japanese, stunned but persistent, regrouped for additional strikes. Callahan's skill had protected the fleet and inflicted significant losses, but the sky remained a battlefield and his challenge was only beginning. The Japanese regrouped rapidly. Radar blips indicated multiple fighters approaching from the northeast, attempting to exploit gaps left by the earlier Kamikaze attack. Lieutenant Callahan adjusted his flight path, anticipating their approach, eyes sharp, hands steady on the controls. The fleet below was still recovering from the initial strikes, but his focus never wavered. The next series of engagements would test every ounce of his training, skill, and resolve. A second wave of enemy fighters dove in, wings slicing the dawn light. Callahan maneuvered aggressively, weaving between tracer fire from both his own guns and the fleet's anti-aircraft batteries. He targeted a Zero attempting to flank the carrier, squeezing the trigger as he banked sharply. The machine guns tore through its fuselage. The plane spiraled uncontrollably, crashing into the Pacific with a violent splash. A second and third enemy plane followed, each intercepted and destroyed through a combination of precise shooting and evasive maneuvers.
The Japanese pilots were increasingly desperate, their formations fragmented under sustained pressure. Some attempted head-on attacks, only to be met with Callahan's relentless counterfire. Others tried to retreat or climb above, seeking an advantageous angle, but radar-guided vectors and squadron coordination cut off escape routes. Each engagement tested the limits of human reflexes, aircraft capabilities, and tactical coordination. Amid this chaos, the pilot's instincts became almost preternatural. He anticipated movements before they happened, banking and rolling to evade bullets, positioning himself for maximum firing arcs. Each shot counted, ammunition was finite, and any miscalculation could leave him vulnerable. Yet his Hellcat performed flawlessly, its engine roaring, armor protecting him from glancing hits, weapons firing without fail. The blend of human skill and superior technology allowed a single pilot to dominate the airspace above a sprawling fleet. The turning point came as Callahan engaged the final two enemy fighters. They were coordinated, attempting a pincer maneuver on the Lexington, but he anticipated their approach. With a series of sharp climbs and dives, he outmaneuvered them, catching one in the open and firing precise bursts that shredded its wings. The other attempted a high-speed pass from behind. Callahan flipped the Hellcat, positioning himself above the descending Zero. His final burst tore through its engine, sending it into a controlled crash into the waves below. By late morning, the immediate threat was neutralized. 5 Japanese aircraft had been downed, a staggering achievement for a single pilot. The fleet remained intact, with minimal damage compared to what might have been. Crewmen on the decks of the carriers and destroyers watched with awe, their respect for Callahan's skill and composure evident in murmurs and gestures. From the Japanese perspective, the failure was crushing. The kamikaze tactic had been neutralized, and the psychological shock compounded the material losses.
Callahan's focus only loosened once the immediate danger had passed. He circled above the fleet, scanning for additional threats before carefully returning to the carrier deck. Landing on the moving deck of the Lexington required precision, yet his execution was flawless. The crew erupted in subdued applause, aware that they had just witnessed not only survival, but an extraordinary demonstration of courage, skill, and the deadly effectiveness of the U.S. naval air strategy. This confrontation crystallized several truths about the Pacific theater. Japanese tactics, while desperate and occasionally devastating, could be countered through preparation, superior technology, and the training of skilled individuals. U.S. pilots like Callahan were not merely operators of machines. They were decisive elements in a complex, integrated system of defense and offense. The combination of human ingenuity, mechanical reliability, and tactical foresight ensured that even the most audacious enemy attacks could be repelled. The battle above the Lexington ended in a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and grim satisfaction. Smoke and debris drifted across the horizon, a reminder of the stakes involved. Callahan and his fellow pilots had not only survived, they had dictated the terms of engagement, turning the enemy's aggression into an opportunity for decisive counterattack. As the fleet regained its operational rhythm, the significance of the engagement settled in. What could have been catastrophic was transformed into a narrative of skill, resilience, and technological superiority. The Japanese pilots, though brave, were forced into reaction, unable to regain initiative. The sky above Okinawa had become a proving ground, one where American ingenuity and courage reasserted dominance over desperation and sacrifice. This moment, the survival and triumph of a single pilot amidst a coordinated kamikaze assault, would echo through naval history, shaping tactics, inspiring morale, and providing a vivid testament to the human and technological capacity of the U.S. Navy during the Pacific War. The immediate danger passed, but the consequences of the battle would ripple through both sides, setting the stage for strategic assessments, psychological impacts, and the lessons that would inform future operations. The day's confrontation, defined by precision, courage, and innovation, had reached its conclusion, preparing the fleet for the next wave of challenges in the unforgiving Pacific.
The immediate battle concluded, but the effects were tangible across the fleet. Lieutenant James Callahan had survived what could have been a catastrophic kamikaze strike and had downed 5 enemy aircraft, a remarkable feat that highlighted both individual skill and the broader strength of U.S. naval operations. On the deck of the USS Lexington, crew members assessed the damage. Smoke still rose from areas scorched by near misses, and shrapnel littered the carrier's surface. Yet thanks to rapid response by damage control teams, no critical systems had been lost. The fleet's coordination and preparation had proven decisive. Anti-aircraft gunners continued to scan the skies, radar operators tracked residual contacts, and fighter patrols maintained vigilance. The ability of the task force to absorb repeated strikes without catastrophic loss reflected months of planning, training, and logistical mastery. Every pilot, sailor, and crewman had played a part in transforming what could have been a tragedy into a controlled, survivable engagement.
From the Japanese perspective, the outcome was deeply demoralizing. 5 aircraft lost in a single engagement without causing significant damage represented both material and psychological setbacks. Reports from surviving pilots noted confusion and shock at the skill of U.S. aviators. The effectiveness of the kamikaze strategy was being questioned, as individual heroism on the American side repeatedly disrupted coordinated attacks. Leaders in the Imperial Japanese Navy recognized that their desperate tactics, while still capable of momentary terror, were increasingly insufficient against well-prepared and technologically advanced adversaries. The human toll, however, remained sobering. Even though the Lexington had survived, the crew had witnessed the destructive potential of kamikaze attacks firsthand. Injuries from shrapnel, burns, and concussive blasts required immediate attention. Medical teams worked swiftly, treating the wounded and preventing minor injuries from becoming fatal. The psychological strain was also evident. Sailors who had watched aircraft plunge from the sky, narrowly missing ships or crew, carried a heightened awareness of mortality. The Pacific War was as much a battle of nerves and endurance as it was a contest of strategy and technology. At the tactical level, the engagement reinforced key lessons for the fleet. Kamikaze pilots were aggressive but predictable in certain patterns: head-on dives, flanking maneuvers, and coordination in small waves. U.S. commanders analyzed each encounter, identifying how radar vectors, combat air patrols, and coordinated anti-aircraft fire could neutralize these threats. These observations informed operational adjustments for the following days, enhancing both the survivability of the fleet and the effectiveness of its offensive operations. For Lieutenant Callahan, the personal aftermath involved debriefings, physical checks, and a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. The squadron commander meticulously reviewed each action: target selection, evasive maneuvers, weapon effectiveness, and situational awareness. Callahan's ability to make rapid, precise decisions under pressure was recognized not only as exceptional, but also as a testament to the Navy's training programs and the Hellcat's engineering superiority. The battle's outcomes extended beyond the immediate encounter. The morale boost for American sailors was significant. Witnessing a pilot survive multiple kamikaze attacks and emerge victorious reinforced confidence in their equipment, leadership, and fellow servicemen. Conversely, Japanese units faced the sobering reality that traditional surprise attacks were increasingly countered by superior planning, technology, and skill. The psychological impact of repeated failure began to influence operational planning, forcing adjustments in tactics, timing, and target selection. The events of this engagement were meticulously documented in after-action reports, preserving details for strategic review. The fleet continued its operations, carrying the lessons of the morning into subsequent missions. The ability of a single pilot to alter the dynamics of an engagement underscored the interplay of individual skill, technological advantage, and disciplined coordination. As the sun climbed higher over the Pacific, the battle above the Lexington faded into history, but its effects were immediately apparent.
Ships remained operational, crews were ready for the next threat, and the Japanese forces, though resolute, were reminded of the overwhelming capabilities they faced. The stage was set for the next phase of the campaign, where lessons learned would shape decisions, and the interplay of skill, courage, and technology would continue to determine outcomes across the Pacific theater. Beyond the immediate battle, the consequences of the engagement rippled through both sides. For the Japanese forces, the losses were deeply discouraging. 5 aircraft destroyed by a single pilot was a stark demonstration of American dominance in training, technology, and tactics. Reports from surviving kamikaze pilots described astonishment and disbelief at how one F-6F Hellcat could thwart multiple coordinated attacks. Morale, already strained by months of retreat and attrition, was further shaken. Japanese command began reassessing the effectiveness of kamikaze tactics, understanding that bravery and determination alone could no longer guarantee success.
In contrast, the U.S. Navy celebrated both the tangible and symbolic victories. The survival of the USS Lexington and its escort ships represented the triumph of preparation, coordination, and technology. Anti-aircraft crews had demonstrated remarkable precision under pressure, while pilots had executed defensive and offensive maneuvers flawlessly. Lieutenant Callahan's actions became a case study in aerial combat. Rapid decision-making, situational awareness, and mastery of the Hellcat allowed one pilot to neutralize threats that could have inflicted catastrophic damage. His success exemplified the integration of human skill and technological superiority, a combination that defined American air power in the Pacific. Strategically, the engagement reinforced lessons that would shape future operations. Kamikaze attacks, while still capable of causing casualties, were increasingly predictable when met with disciplined air patrols, radar tracking, and layered anti-aircraft defenses. Fleet commanders used the data from this and similar encounters to refine tactics, deploy combat air patrols more effectively, and optimize the placement of escort ships. This operational intelligence contributed directly to the Allies' continued advance across the Pacific, ensuring that subsequent campaigns would benefit from both improved defenses and offensive coordination. Recognition of heroism followed quickly. Lieutenant Callahan received commendations from squadron and fleet commanders, highlighting the combination of skill, courage, and decisiveness displayed during the engagement. His story circulated among the fleet, boosting morale and providing a vivid example of how training, preparation, and personal bravery could intersect to influence outcomes. Fellow pilots studied his maneuvers, integrating aspects of his approach into their own defensive tactics. Beyond individual recognition, this engagement reinforced confidence in the broader systems, planes, carriers, radar, and fleet coordination that enabled such feats. On the human level, the aftermath was a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and reflection. Crew members who had witnessed the battle grappled with the fragility of life at sea and the psychological strain of constant threat. Survivors recounted the sounds of engines, explosions, and machine gun fire, and the sudden flashes of kamikaze planes diving toward the fleet. For American forces, each successful defense against the kamikaze was a reminder of both the human cost and the necessity of meticulous training and coordination. For the Japanese, each failure highlighted the growing gap between courage and capability, signaling the inevitable shift in momentum toward the Allies. The engagement also underscored the role of technology as a decisive factor in modern warfare. The Hellcat, radar guidance, and integrated fleet systems created a synergistic effect that amplified the effectiveness of individual pilots. Conversely, reliance on desperate, minimally trained kamikaze pilots revealed vulnerabilities in the Japanese strategic approach, particularly when facing an opponent that combined superior firepower, intelligence, and coordination. By the end of the day, the skies above Okinawa were clear, but the memory of the engagement lingered in every pilot, sailor, and commander. The lessons were immediate and lasting. Preparation, training, and technological advantage could offset even the most extreme enemy tactics. The engagement reinforced the overarching reality of the Pacific War. The Americans had turned the initiative firmly in their favor, and moments of heroism like Callahan's exemplified the skill and resolve that would carry the Allies toward victory. The engagement above the USS Lexington stands as a testament to the intricate interplay of human skill, technological innovation, and strategic planning in the Pacific War. Lieutenant James Callahan's actions were extraordinary not because they were unprecedented, but because they exemplified the principles that allowed the U.S. Navy to dominate the skies and seas of World War II. One pilot, armed with superior training and equipment, could decisively shape the outcome of a battle, demonstrating the critical importance of preparation and discipline in warfare. Technological superiority, the F-6F Hellcat, radar-guided operations, and coordinated fleet defenses provided the foundation upon which human courage could be amplified. Each aircraft, each gun, each radar signal contributed to a system capable of absorbing and neutralizing threats that only a few years prior might have overwhelmed even the most experienced crews. The Japanese kamikaze tactic, born of desperation and ideological commitment, revealed the limits of bravery when confronted with preparation, precision, and superior firepower. Yet beyond strategy and technology, the human element remained central. Callahan's composure under extreme pressure, his instinctive decision-making, and his willingness to place himself between the enemy and his comrades reflected the broader ethos of American servicemen in the Pacific, resourceful, disciplined, and unyielding in the face of danger. The battle was not only a clash of machines, but a confrontation of courage, resolve, and ingenuity, a vivid reminder that warfare tests both the human mind and spirit. The historical significance extends beyond a single day or a single battle. Encounters like this shaped the broader trajectory of the Pacific Campaign, informing tactics, boosting morale, and reinforcing confidence in the U.S. Navy's ability to sustain offensive and defensive operations across vast distances. They also provided lessons in resilience, adaptability, and leadership that would influence military doctrine for decades. In the end, the story of Lieutenant Callahan and the USS Lexington is more than a record of aerial victories. It is a reflection on the nature of courage, the power of preparation, and the enduring truth that human skill, when combined with innovation and discipline, can turn the tide of history. The skies of Okinawa that day bore witness to heroism, strategy, and the decisive impact of one individual within the vast machinery of war.